This is Fresh Tracks Weekly. This week we are talking about how Colorado might be shifting away from over-the-counter opportunities for non-resident elk hunting. But before that, we have a few news headlines. In Texas, the Parks and Wildlife Department killed off an entire herd of high-fence white-tailed deer after a severe chronic wasting disease outbreak and years of legal battles. Dak Collins with Outdoor Life put out an article detailing the saga between Texas Parks and Wildlife and Robert Williams, who ran the high-fence RW Trophy Ranch where the depopulation occurred. Williams' ranch had a doe test positive for CWD in 2021, at which point the Texas Parks and Wildlife planned to depopulate the herd in order to prevent further spread, as this was the standard protocol when CWD was detected. But Williams and his attorney fought this action through multiple appeals in circuit courts, ultimately leading to a ruling from the Texas Supreme Court that sided with Texas Parks and Wildlife this May. During the time of all of those legal battles, from that initial positive test in 2021 until May 2024, 254 of the captive deer that had died tested positive for CWD, in what Texas Parks and Wildlife called the worst CWD outbreak in Texas history. They said nearly 90% of the samples collected from the ranch tested positive, and that they were losing an average of 2% of the deer's herd each week. After the court ruled in favor of Texas Parks and Wildlife, they went through with a depopulation, which involved 68 department employees shooting 249 deer with rifles within the high fence operation, which admittedly sounds pretty gruesome. In the interview with Outdoor Life, Williams painted a pretty negative picture of Texas Parks and Wildlife and the methods that they utilized to conduct the depopulation, but it sounded like Williams had multiple opportunities to work together with the state, but fought them instead. It kind of puts everyone in a tough spot. Even though it was Williams' private property, the outbreak within his herd puts wild deer along with other captive operations at extreme risk. Even the Texas Deer Association, which is an outspoken group that supports captive deer operations, eventually supported the killing of Williams' herd in order to protect hunters and other landowners. In Montana, Governor Greg Gianforte is again in the spotlight after the New York Times published a story highlighting some new information on his questionable wolf trapping incident from a few years back. In 2021, Gianforte trapped a collared wolf just outside of Yellowstone National Park, which would have been completely legal if he had taken the required wolf trapper education course. He was issued a written warning for not having the required certification. He also tried to calm the situation by quickly completing the course. Several news stories broke about the incident, but it seemed as though many people just dismissed it as an honest mistake. But in the recent New York Times article, 2 former Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks employees brought some new information to the story. Gianforte had called the Harvest Reporting Hotline to report that he had shot the trapped wolf, but the next day when the game warden went to check in the wolf, he was told by their law enforcement chief to change the trapper of record to Matt Lumley, who was Gianforte's hunting partner. The game warden refused to change it, saying that Gianforte had already called it in. The enforcement chief later revealed that he was pressured by his superiors to change the name, but after the game warden refused to budge, he backed him up. Eventually, they came to the agreement that Gianforte would receive a warning and he would get to keep the hide and skull of the wolf. Not long after that, rumors began to circulate that the enforcement chief was engaging in inappropriate conduct at the workplace, along with creating a hostile work environment. It eventually resulted in the chief leaving FWP with a $150,000 severance and signing an agreement to not disparage the department. The game warden involved with the incident has also left the department on his own accord. Others have been quick to note that they think that the New York Times article is simply a political strategy during an election year, as the story occurred 3 years ago. Regardless, it seems pretty clear that there were some shenanigans that went down and the governor attempted to cover it up. There's also been an interesting trend at FWP of individuals who are seemingly doing their job quite well that are facing sudden shakeup, such as the case with Eileen Rice, the fisheries chief who was recently placed on administrative leave. Currently, there's no reason given for why she was placed on administrative leave, so we'll have to keep an eye on that and see what happens. In some more fun news, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation recently announced the completion of a land and conservation access project in Southeast Wyoming that resulted in 6,660 acres of permanent public access. RMEF actually acquired the land back in 2022, but they admit that they tried to not hold on to land, but rather place it in the hands of those who will conserve wildlife habitat and provide public access. The recent transaction resulted in 2,660 acres going to Wyoming Game and Fish to be managed as a wildlife habitat management area, with the remaining 4,000 acres being sold to the 88 Ranch. Wyoming Game and Fish now holds a permanent conservation easement on that 4,000 acres along with permanent hunting access going forward. This land also blocks up and links together 38,000 acres of contiguous state and federal land in an area where public access is not easy. The zone also hosts a very healthy elk population. It's always cool to see collaborative projects like this being completed, creating more public access and more wildlife habitat. All right, now we're going to jump into our deeper dive where we're talking about Colorado and the recent proposal to change the allocation of non-resident archery elk permits within the state. Talking about Colorado and non-resident elk hunting.
Archery over-the-counter elk hunting?
Well, and this is your idea to come up with this one, but
right.
In some recent commission meetings, they've been having a lot of talk about the allocation of resident versus non-resident elk hunting opportunities in the state.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's been interesting to follow from afar. And it brings together so many topics that we've talked about here on Fresh Tracks Weekly. Resident, non-resident allocation, apathy versus getting involved, a whole lot of things. Crowding, population numbers, resident population numbers, funding.
Right.
I mean, pretty much everything is right there in a microcosm in Colorado right now.
Yeah, and we talked about screwing over the non-resident hunter in the past episode in a little bit more broad sense, but with Wyoming was kind of the main example in that one. But this one we're going to focus on Colorado. And I guess a little background too is so Colorado, if I'm not mistaken, currently offers probably the most opportunity for over-the-counter elk hunting of any state.
They host more non-resident elk hunters than all other western states combined.
That's crazy. Yeah, and well, they also have the
largest elk herd.
The most elk, yeah. So that's part of it, but still, it's kind of crazy. So this is a huge thing for non-resident hunters.
Yeah, and it's been a discussion that's been going on for quite some time. And for the purpose of background, Colorado Parks and Wildlife was trying to determine are the complaints about the over-the-counter hunts, over-the-counter for archery, I think there's 90 or high 80, somewhere in there, number of units, second rifle and third rifle. And these are they're all West Slope units, or pretty much all, and they're mostly in the west and northwest corner of the state, or at least the west half of the state. So the complaints were coming in over the last 15 years. It's getting crowded.
Right.
And so from the outside, this is what it looked like, is the department said, all right, we're going to see, is this really the case? So they came up with a bunch of data. A bunch of resident hunters are like, wait a second, that data, you're forgetting this, forgetting that, da-da-da. And I don't really know whose data was right or whose was wrong, but they kind of came to an agreement of what the data is that should be used for determining this. So it's really interesting that when you look at the trends in Colorado for over-the-counter license sales.
Right.
And the department in their May 31st memo put this out. And they have a whole history of everything, but it summarizes in a couple ways that, where is it? That non-resident, or the mix between resident and non-resident over, I think they started measuring in 2000, kind of was about 50-50 when there were only, I think they sold 10,000 over-the-counter tags a long time ago. Where is that? I just had it pulled. Oh, here we go.
So are you trying to look up like kind of the past versus? I have some of the numbers in front of me too.
So in their memo, they say in the early 2000s, the number of over-the-counter archery licenses, not the second and third rifle, but archery, was 10,000. Split kind of 50-50 resident, non-resident.
Okay. From
2014 to 19, that number of archery over-the-counter licenses ranged from 36,000 to 39,000. So in that 15 to 19 year period, it doubled to tripled.
Right.
And the split was residents 58%, non-residents 51%. Now, in their last year, they reported 2023, it dropped to 27,000. So it dropped from the mid to high 30s down to 27,000. But here's the concern was there is that now the split, instead of being 50-50 or more residents than non-residents, it was 53% non-residents, 47% residents. They're looking at that and saying, all right, as our resident population is growing, are they feeling pushed out or overcrowded out of the over-the-counter units, at least for archery? So this whole discussion currently doesn't impact the second and third rifle seasons.
Okay.
Over-the-counter archery.
That's the proposal that's on the table currently.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so there has been discussions of like just overall crowding too, because that was Brandon Siegfried, who I believe you were just talking to.
Yeah,
right?
that's who I was on the phone with. Great guy.
Yeah, he gave a presentation in front of the commission, just talking about like overall changes too, not just within that archery hunt. And like, some of the numbers were pretty eye-opening to me. Just the fact, like, because he noted that there was, non-resident numbers have gone up 45,000 from 2015 until now. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, the resident numbers are only going up around 240 people per year. Yeah. So it's like a 20x increase in non-resident versus resident.
Right.
And I think that might be for all hunting limited entry and the over-the-counter opportunities combined. So just to have like a sky or like a 30,000-foot view of like, it's pretty significant just the amount of non-resident hunters like increasing in that state. So
and, I've always used Colorado over-the-counter as my fallback. If I didn't have an elk tag somewhere else, second or third rifle,
right,
I'm going to Colorado. I've never hunted the over-the-counter archery.
Gotcha.
But I think that's what a lot of people did. When people would ask me, hey, I didn't draw a tag, what should I do? I'm like, well, if you want to fight the crowds, over-the-counter in Colorado is a possibility. And, their department, this is where you get into this funding part of it, right? The department gets a ton of money out of that.
Right.
And so the question resident hunters are asking is, are you allowing this to happen just because of the funding to it? And whether or not that's the case, arguments will be made either way. But it certainly could give the appearance of that.
Right.
Of however the department decides.
Well, and I think one of the things that we've talked about in a lot of previous episodes too that is on my mind is is it bad for the resource, like i.e. the elk, or is it just about hunter satisfaction? And both are important.
Right.
But I think it's like if it's affecting both, then you really have an issue on your hand. If you're affecting the resource and the distribution of elk to where it's not good for the herd, then that's an even bigger issue than if it's just about hunter satisfaction.
Yeah.
And again, like both are important, but it's just like that's a distinction that I think is interesting to take into account when you're looking at this.
It is, because the Colorado Parks and Wildlife memo so this is from the department, not from the commission. Mm-hmm. It talks about their hunter satisfaction surveys. And so a lot of their data is, I don't want to say it's driven by, but the reason they've went on this process is because of some of these hunter satisfaction, either anecdotal complaints or formal complaints or surveys and stuff. So I think the resident hunters thought, man, we're just going to get rolled here, right? It's going to be same as always.
Yeah.
And then the other day, when the department came out with their new proposal, the department flipped and said, you know what? We should preserve over-the-counter archery elk for residents, but we got to do something different with non-residents. Archery.
Gotcha.
Elk.
Yeah.
So that was a change at the department level. Now the question becomes, when that goes to the commission, how's the commission going to vote? Is the commission going to say, no, keep it as is?
Right.
Or is the commission going to say, all right, we're going to take the department's recommendation on this?
Yeah, and that's like one of the interesting things that's happened in the last two commission meetings is kind of this back and forth between Brandon and some of the commissioners is the discussion of what is the, as the trustee, and this is where I'm going to get the language wrong, and I'm going to rely on you to correct me, but like the commissioners as trustees are, supposed to be catering to the residents of Colorado.
Right, because the residents are the true beneficiaries. Us as non-residents, we're just there as stakeholders willing to write a big check.
Right. So, but that's where some of the argument came in is that I think one of the commissioners was implying that the non-residents are also beneficiaries
Right.
in some way.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's like getting kind of, and then Brandon's making the argument like, well, no, not necessarily. Like they're like you said, they're a funding mechanism and they're a stakeholder, but they are not the beneficiary under the public trust doctrine, which this is all supposed to be functioning off of. And this is where I'm going to rely on you to really explain the base of it.
And Brandon and I were swapping emails while a lot of that was going on. And another really interesting sidebar to watch of this is to see resident hunters. And I don't care what state you live in. You are the residents. You are the true beneficiaries of that trust for wildlife. And to see Brandon and a whole bunch of other people get behind this and start a Facebook page, bring in a whole bunch of other people, and make a difference.
Yeah.
And now some people, a lot of our audience need to see that, say, well, yeah, make a difference, all right. That means less for me as a non-resident. Well, I get that. But no matter what state you live in, you are first and foremost vested in your own state.
Right.
Because that's where you are a beneficiary. That's where someone is accountable to you as a trustee.
Yeah.
And it's pretty admirable to see guys who felt that the cards were so heavily stacked against them. They did their homework. They did their research. They were super professional. And they convinced the department to maybe change their mind.
Yeah.
Now, the job is, can you get the commission to change their mind?
Yeah, and just based off of some of the comments we got on that last episode talking about screwing over the non-resident hunter, I feel like some of the audience is going to be pretty frustrated because like coming at it as a non-resident,
right?
You're going to be like, well, I should have the opportunity to hunt there too. Like they shouldn't screw me over. And so how do you? I think it'd be worthwhile to take some time to try to respond to that. Like how would you respond to that argument of like, we, as someone from Iowa,
right,
I deserve to hunt elk in Colorado,
right,
and I pay a bunch of money to do it. I should be able to do it. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah,
argument?
It's never the response people want to hear.
Yeah.
All right, and so you and I and that person in Iowa or wherever that you're referring to, we're all non-residents in 49 other states. So any non-resident hunting that I get to do is purely at the pleasure of the residents of that state. And they're the beneficiaries and they're trustees. And they say, these non-resident stakeholders, if they pay enough, I guess we'll let some of them in.
Right.
By law, they don't have to let one non-resident hunt in that state. And if you don't believe that, look at elk in South Dakota. Look at moose in North Dakota. The list goes on and on.
And a bunch of species in Alaska. That's like the classic example where,
And the reason you can do this is because it's a state-based system. And it's a public trust with the trustees being appointed or elected and the beneficiaries being the citizens, whether they hunt or don't hunt. The rest of us have a lower standing. It's called a stakeholder. So in the order of standing of who a trustee is accountable to, first and foremost is the beneficiaries, i.e. the citizens of that state. After that, they can be accountable to stakeholders if the stakeholder brings something of value to the trust. Like a big non-resident check you're willing to write.
Yeah.
And I hate that. I wish it wasn't expensive.
Right.
But every state gets the opportunity to say that or do that or implement that.
Yeah.
Like in Montana, we statutorily say, if there's only 3 elk left in this state by statute, we're still issuing 17,000 non-resident tags because we want 17,000 non-residents here.
Yeah.
So what do you say to the person in Iowa? Well, you say, unfortunately, this is how our system has been designed since 1842, when the first cases about all this came out. And since then, many, many more cases. And some will say, well, it's public land. Why shouldn't I get the same right? Because there's no connection between land ownership and the wildlife.
Right.
Where that wildlife stands does not change the fact that it's held in trust by the state for those citizen beneficiaries. So if you said, by my quasi-ownership of being a quasi-owner of public land, I should get opportunity allocated to me? Well, does that mean that in Montana, where 2/3 of the state is private, under that theory, 2/3 of our hunting tags would have to get purchased from landowners.
Right.
So,
Which we would not be a big fan of.
no.
But
I get the frustration, and I understand the feeling of, well, where am I going to go? And that's why I always go back to, we need more elk. We need more deer. We need more pronghorn.
Yeah.
That doesn't solve every problem, but it eases a whole lot of these problems.
Yeah. So what do you think it means for some of the states? So say Colorado does start to have more heavily restrict non-resident hunting in whatever fashion, starting with maybe this archery thing. Do you think that will in turn cause Colorado residents to have to step up in whether it's pay more to fund the department? Like if you have less revenue coming in from those non-resident hunters, do you think and I think that's one of the questions too to ask of the residents of Colorado. It's like, okay, so are you willing to foot the bill from that lost revenue?
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know.
I think they are.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be some that are like, no, I already paid too much.
Right.
You always have that. And then you always have some that, well, if it was 100,000, I'd still pay. You got the bell curve, right? There's going to be some vocal people over who feel that it's too much. But I suspect the majority of Coloradans are saying, you know what, for a higher quality, less crowded experience, we're willing to pay more.
Yeah.
Will their legislature let the department raise resident fees?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because here's the problem. You have a legislature that often says, no, we're not going to let you raise resident fees. Now you have a big revenue gap. How do you fund research? How do you fund management?
Yeah.
And you can cut things. There's always places to cut things. But sooner or later, you're not cutting fat. You're cutting meat and bone.
Yeah.
And things like this don't happen in a vacuum. I mean, I look at it as Colorado is now starting down the path towards what Wyoming does, right? Wyoming says our residents can buy in certain units a general tag over the counter.
Right.
But you non-residents, you got to draw that tag and you got to burn your points.
Yeah.
This is if Colorado does adopt this is them going that first step towards what Wyoming is like.
Well, in Montana too, to some extent, right? You have, as a non-resident, you have to draw the general license to.
And you and I get to go buy it at the sporting goods store.
Right.
So, it's interesting to observe that no state has been more generous than Colorado.
Yeah.
In deer and elk. After that Wyoming was the most generous state. Well, you look this year, Colorado changed deer from 35% to 25%. Non-residents were just like, up in arms. Well, they're still the most generous deer state out there, even dropping from 35% to 25%.
Yeah.
And they're probably going to continue to be the most generous elk state. So we need more elk in places like Kentucky and Tennessee and North Carolina and Virginia and West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Arkansas and Missouri.
Yeah.
And South Dakota and North Dakota.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I honestly, to me, it makes sense. I'm okay with it for the most part as like, you cater towards your residents.
Right.
Of the state that you're,
yeah. And
representing.
Here's the kind of trick a lot of non-residents have used to not burn their points. So they want to build points, and they'll just go hunt over the counter because then they don't have to burn their points.
Right.
Or they'll get a reissue tag because they don't got to burn their points. They'll get a landowner tag because they don't got to burn their points. If Colorado really wants to address the point building or point creeping, do what Nevada does. If you get a tag any way, shape, or form, your points go to 0.
Yeah.
And if you want to just impose that on non-residents, just impose it on non-residents. How will that?
Right.
But
I'm actually curious. One of the things that I was trying to understand a little further. So in Brandon's presentation, he talked about the tag caps. Basically, there's a certain amount of tags that can go to non-residents.
Right.
And then, but it only applied to your first choice.
Right. So
and
what
not
happened,
second, third, fourth. So
right. So there's leftover tags.
Yeah.
Every resident gets their tag. So let's say it's a limited entry draw, and there's 1,000 tags. Every resident, only 400 residents applied. Access is tough, or whatever the reason. So there's 600 left. Well, they feel every non-resident draws their first choice. Well, a lot of residents maybe don't put it as a second or third choice. And so we go 400 of the 1,000 to residents and 300 of the 1,000 to non-residents. Whoa, now you violated the 20% cap.
Right.
Well, what happens to the other 300 tags? Because we got 400, 300, that leaves 300. Well, they usually go to non-residents in a second or third draw.
Because there's more of them too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you end up with kind of a backwards way of, if you want to call it violating or exceeding the 20% cap.
Yeah. That one seems like a one that people would want to fix quickly in my mind. That one does not look good to me. But anyway, I just found that interesting. And I guess to clarify, as far as I know, that is not up for discussion.
From what I see, that's not up for discussion. And so this is and maybe I'm weird that I really am fascinated by watching from afar, even within our own state, how these social issues, because no one to date, anyhow, has submitted any information that says this is a biological issue. Maybe it is, but I've not seen anything.
Right.
But it's interesting to watch the social issues and how each state is addressing them and what influence the residents can create and build up to have, what voice they can create for themselves versus some states, they just feel powerless. And they're just like, well, we're going to get rolled again. And so it's very interesting to watch. But, my days of using Colorado over the counter as my fallback, if this goes not just to archery, but eventually goes to rifle, that might be an option. And I end up having to check off my list. Or I'm going to have to burn my points to go there and do it. Right. And I've had some good over-the-counter hunts there that I would have burned a couple points to go do it.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with having to burn my points to go hunt somewhere.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it's coming, and it's just the writing on the wall. But it'll be interesting to see. So this alternative 2 that they are recommending go forward. Yeah, that is on the next commission meeting. Right. Is that correct?
June 12th. The commission, the full commission, will vote. So they're the ones who get to decide.
Yeah.
So first, it's the department does all the scoping, public comments, and everything, and they come up with their alternatives. Then the department selects an alternative that they kind of put out there for discussion. Well, now this alternative got changed to, let's tweak it and use a different alternative, I guess.
Okay.
So now the department says, here's what we believe. We're going to give it to the commission to vote on. Commission's going to take public comment. They're going to vote, and then you'll find out.
So that public comment. So if you're a Colorado resident, that is currently happening.
Yeah.
Right.
So. Yeah. And, it's interesting. The two big groups on this one have been the page Brandon and his friends put together. I think it's Colorado Resident Hunter or something. That's a Facebook page. And then the Colorado Bowhunters Association. And I guess for those I don't care what the issue is in your state, whether you're in a whitetail state or you're in a, some state that it's small game or whatever. Watching this unfold in Colorado is another example of how residents can advocate for their own cause and make a difference.
Yeah.
It might be frustrating. It might take time. It's never easy. Like I always say, right? It's always difficult. It's always uncomfortable, and it's always inconvenient. Well, this is a perfect example of that in action, and they did it. And I know a lot of non-residents are going to be like, why are you thinking that's such a good thing? Well, I think it's a good thing anytime beneficiaries stand up and hold their trustees accountable.
Yeah, I like it. And that group's name is Colorado Resident Hunter Association.
Okay. Yeah. And it's a Facebook group, I think, or something like that.
Gotcha, yeah.
Yeah. But they put it together, and they got 6,800 signatures, like, boom.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. Well,
I don't know that we've solved anything there, Marcus, but I think it just is. I hope the audience realizes a lot of these things come together, and they might wonder why are the Fresh Tracks guys talking about this? Why are they talking about that? Because these are the things we talk about are the things that come together, and are the influencers of what the end product is in a decision like Colorado.
Yeah,
And it affects us all, residents or non-residents.
for sure. Well, thanks for giving us all that intel.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this stuff.
I appreciate it.